Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. Tonight, I have Grace Reef as my guest, and we're going to be talking about childcare here in Virginia. She is the president of the Early Learning Policy Group, and she has done work this year in the legislative session with the Childcare Aware Virginia. Welcome, Grace.
Thank you.
So I met you probably the first time a couple of years ago, and we keep running into each other because we run in the same legislative circles. And there are a lot of legislators working on child care issues in addition to a lot of other intersecting issues of interest. And so every session we start out quite optimistically thinking that this is going to be the year that we're going to move Virginia forward in helping to better protect the safety of children. And every year we are devastated and disappointed by the fact that that doesn't happen. We have one bill left, and we will talk about that toward the end of the show, about the one bill left. But I want to just ask you a little bit about how you got into this work, how you became a consultant working in this early childhood policy arena.
Sure. I worked in the Senate, the United States Senate, for almost 18 years. And when I was there, I worked on, an array of family issues, one of which was childcare, Head Start, pre-K, early learning. And I really believed that if you want to change the trajectory for a child, you really want to improve the chances for economic opportunity or really success for all kids. It really starts with early learning, early childhood. So when I left the Senate, I went to a nonprofit, the National Association of Child Care Resource and Referral Agencies. And when I was there, we did a lot of research. We looked at child care laws, state by state. We looked at centers. We looked at homes. We scored, and we picked 15 things that were important. We scored them. We ranked them. And the first one was in 2007 on centers, and then 2008 on homes, and we went back 2009 on centers, and we kept flipping. And all the while, we worked with Congress, and we let them know. And before that time, there really wasn't one place to go. What are the states doing? So we have a federal law that's a block grant, sends the money to the states. All the states determine what they're going to do, what their rules are going to be, who's going to be eligible for a subsidy, what their licensing system's going to look like. But nobody really put it all together. So we did it. We worked with Congress. Congress held a number of hearings between 2010 and 2014. And then in a bipartisan manner, because it really is a bipartisan issue, they passed a law to reauthorize child care, which hadn't been done in 18 years, which was based on the research that we had done on state policies, because they varied widely. And now all the states are looking to see, how do we implement that federal law? So a couple years ago, I started Early Learning Policy Group to work with organizations and some state agencies to figure out, how can we do better? Why does this matter? And now it's, how do we comply with the federal law? And so I started working in Virginia with Childcare Aware of Virginia. They're a nonprofit. They work statewide. They help families find childcare. They work with providers to strengthen the quality of care. They work with some providers to help them get licensed. They're involved with, training and technical assistance when you go hands-on into a classroom or into a home and you help that provider better understand, how do I work with the kids? What kind of activities are appropriate? What might be some literacy activities?
And nutrition, because I think there's a whole separate program for nutrition.
Oh, and nutrition. It's called the Child and Adult Care Food Program. It's run out of USDA, the Department of Agriculture. And providers first, they may not know about it. Then when they do know about it, how do they gain access to it? We work with them. And children who are low income, who otherwise may go hungry or may not have nutritious meals, the providers can take advantage of this program and get help with menus and food reimbursement, and all of that is part of healthy development. A child is not going to have healthy development if they don't eat in a nutritious manner. So it's all related.
So there's 50 states, and there's a lot of this that is state-based. There might be federal programs, but as you said, not everybody's...
Actually, Catherine, it's actually all state-based. There's a federal law, and it sends money to the states. And prior to 2014, you basically could do anything with it. You just had to say, oh yeah, we have a licensing system, and then you send in a plan every couple of years about what it is. But there weren't any parameters. Before 2014, there was no requirement for a background check for providers. There was no minimum requirement for training for child care providers. You know, what the knowledge should be, what they should work with the children on. There were no inspections. So basically, you know, it was buyer beware, and states were all over the place, and the studies that we worked on helped to educate Congress so that they see that. And frankly, at the same time, we are in the media age now, and so over the years, you know, things have evolved where you have Twitter and you have Facebook, and there's much more immediacy in the media of what's going on. And there were a number of families whose children died in childcare, and we, when I was at NACRA, the National Association of Child Care Resource and Referral Agencies, reached out to those families. We said, what happened? How did that happen? We looked at the law, we looked at the regs, we looked at the settings. We joined those parents into a network. We really engaged them and brought them to Capitol Hill to meet with members of Congress. And frankly, we've done the same in Virginia. We have a parent network. Those parents are at the core of every hearing, of every committee meeting, of every budget meeting. We're a team. We call it, you know, child care team. But without those parents telling their story, it's hard for the legislators to really understand. You know, you have all these laws, but the laws are kind of like just laws. But when a parent talks about a story about what happened to their child, and legislators see, oh, I see, that could have been prevented. Or, oh, I understand better now. It's just another connection with real people on the ground, and sometimes legislators have their own circles and they may not see it, or sometimes legislators may not know it. But today with the media, and Twitter and Facebook particularly, and the whole social media scene, it's immediate. These stories happen, and legislators are called to respond.
So let's talk about the economics of this, which I'm sure we could do the whole show just on the economics of this. But let's start with one of the dominant narratives when we talk about child care that people assume or have been led to understand that regulation makes the cost go up. That's the first dominant narrative. Okay. That if you have regulations, oh my goodness, everybody's going to be paying more. So let's talk about that. But the other side of that economic issue is that when we talk about the strength of the economy and creating jobs and attracting companies, how come people or organizations like chambers of commerce have not connected creating safer, more quality child care with building a workforce that includes many working families?
You know, that's actually a very interesting question. I'm working on it in Virginia. I haven't quite gotten the business interest yet. But I do a lot of work with the Committee for Economic Development, and they are a nonprofit, DC-based, that's really the voice of business leaders throughout the country. And they're called CED, with CED, I'm working in Florida and New York and Massachusetts and Wisconsin and New Mexico. And we are engaging business leaders, North Carolina, and they get it. They understand they're the ultimate stakeholder, both in the case of today's workers, if they don't have reliable childcare, they're not going to show up, they're not going to be focused. Absenteeism costs $3 billion a year. I mean, there are crazy costs when parents with young kids don't have quality, affordable, reliable childcare.
But are those businesses connecting it to public policy?
They actually are. So in some of these states, North Carolina and Florida particularly, they're driving it. They're driving, talking to state legislators about why quality matters. They understand brain development in the first 3 years. That's when your brain is wired. That sets the foundation for future learning. They get it. They know if a child doesn't start school ready to learn, that child's not going to perform at grade level, that child may not graduate high school, all these things, that affects their workforce. They get it. So it's not just about a work support for parents. It's also about what the future workforce is going to look like. If these kids don't show up ready to learn, have that solid foundation, it's much more costly to rewire later or do remedial assistance later. You know, a couple things to put it into perspective. In Virginia, I looked at it, it costs about $10,900 a year to educate a child in public school. And about 9% of kids have, last year, you look at the data, from kindergarten to 12th grade, stayed back. At least 1 year.
Wow.
And so that is $1.1 billion. I mean, we're paying $1.1 billion for those kids, K to 12, to repeat a year, because public education, people might think of it as free, but actually it's not free.
There's a
and you
cost
spend
to it.
another year in school, there is
We're all
a
paying
cost.
for it. Yeah, we're all paying for it.
So I looked at kindergarten to third grade, and I thought, how are we doing? So there's about 430,000 kids, and it's about 1.6% that repeat a grade. That is $75.8 million that we spent last year just in kindergarten to third grade on the kids who are staying back. So if we invest early and they're in a quality setting and they start school ready to learn, that's a big taxpayer savings. You live in a community and you may think, I don't have kids, I'm not sure I care about child care, but you should as a taxpayer, because you're going to foot the bill when that child starts school not ready to succeed.
No, I definitely believe that this is a community issue. I don't think people can simply step away and say, well, I don't have children in child care. Well, you work with people who have children in child care. If your own aren't in child care, someday you may have grandchildren who are in child care. And if we don't build it now, guess what's not going to be there?
I think part of the issue really is, a public campaign almost. People think, and it might be generational, well, people think of child care as babysitting. Anybody can do it.
You're right, that's generational.
And so the truth is, when a child is in childcare, and the Census Bureau says it's about 36 hours a week on average for working moms who work full time, that's a lot of time. That is their early learning setting. And if they're sitting in somebody's home and the TV is on all day and that's what they have and that's what they're doing,
Yep.
There's no question about why that child's not starting school ready to learn. I'm not saying at 3 years old they have to be reading, far from it. But we know that nurturing and age-appropriate activities and building those critical thinking skills and self-regulation, like making good decisions and just helping children along in their development, makes a big difference, so that when they start school, they are ready. They've been read to. They understand that there are words. They understand that letters may have sounds. They don't have to be reading at 3 or 4 years old, but there are these basic concepts that stimulate the brain wiring, and it's what they're exposed to. And so you have some families where maybe they don't have books at home. Maybe they're not reading to their kids every night.
I think that is one of the key things right there, is books in the home. And I think they've known about that research since the 1960s, the impact of books in the home to children's educational achievement. So we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to be talking with Grace Reef, and we're going to be talking about child care in Virginia, both quality and safety. So please join us after this break, because this is something we should all be interested in.
So, same time next week?
Well, of course. Put away a few bucks, feel like $1 million. For free tips to help you save, go to Feed the Pig.
I can't change, even if I tried, even if I wanted to.
I dare you. I dare you to change the world. Yeah, you. Getting that college education.
I dare you to be somebody important.
Like be a teacher or a reality TV star.
I dare you to stand up here.
To call the shots.
To be a role model.
An inspiration.
An innovator.
To be a teacher.
Think you can change my life?
Make me excited about science like you.
Have a career that really means something?
Then do it.
I dare you.
They say you don't have to be so strong. But this is my mother and my purpose. Strength is not optional. See, I lift her now like she raised me then. So I know my strength is super, but I'm still human.
Oh, look who's here.
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Joining me tonight is Grace Reef, president of the Early Learning Policy Group. And we're talking about childcare tonight, and it's something that I think is a community issue. I'm glad to have Grace here because she has spent decades of her career working on early learning policy, and a lot of people are not necessarily putting together early learning with childcare. They act like there's some wall in between that, and there's not a wall in between that at all.
Well, I think that's one of the issues that we need to do better education about, because people equate childcare with babysitting.
Right.
They're not thinking of it as an early learning setting. But when you look at the hours that children spend in childcare, it is their early learning setting. And those hours that a caregiver spends with the child, they really matter. And when you look at the research, you can see brain development during the first 3 years of life. That is when the brain is developing the fastest. That is when the whole wiring is shaped for future, social, emotional, physical, cognitive development. It's really not babysitting. And the people that work with children need to have the knowledge and the skills to understand best approaches to children. Anybody that has kids, I have 3 kids, the approach to each child is different. They need to understand, how can I best work with kids? What do we work with? Maybe understand reading a story and then connecting that story to a science project, or connecting that story to something with math, or connecting that story to other critical thinking skills, like you're in circle time and you let the kids contribute to the story and they understand, what's a protagonist? Some of the fundamental things that sometimes happen in wealthier families, just kind of...
Because kids are exposed to different experiences.
To books, to museums,
they go to summer
trips.
Camp, and yes, they have story hour at the library, and things that not necessarily everybody has access to.
But sometimes, in middle-class families, if you have more than one child, that cost of care is so expensive, you really struggle. You try to find anything that you can afford. You keep your fingers crossed, it's going to be good. You're not really sure. And obviously for low-income families, it's that much harder.
So let's talk about that.
Sure.
So I had 3 children in daycare all at once. My kids.
So did I.
So behind our mortgage payment, our biggest monthly expense was childcare.
Right.
For a lot of years.
Right. Many
until
years.
Until they got into like kindergarten, and then
mine are in college. It's still my greatest expense.
There you go. So knowing that you're paying a lot of money for this care, first of all, should tell us that we should expect something of quality for the money we're spending, no matter what amount of money
it's not actually that simple, and the reason is this. Childcare is a business.
It
so
is.
Let's say you have this business, and they need to hire people, they need to pay the rent, they need to pay utilities, they need to pay, equipment, maybe a sand table, rice table, art supplies, blocks. They have to have age-appropriate materials. They have to have a playground. Playground has to be safe. All of these things, it's cost of the business. So, in some states, the cost may be very low. But in some, like, D.C. or New York City, those costs are amazingly high.
Right, because their costs are amazing. So it's a pass-through cost.
It's a pass-through.
And so the market, and also the demand, drives what the market price is as well.
Right. And so at the beginning, I was almost thinking, you thought, well, if you pay a lot, you might get quality.
Yeah.
I can't go there with you.
No, and I don't think so. But
not necessarily. The driver really is the parent revenue. That's the operating money to run a center. And that center director has to make ends meet. And so it really depends on how many kids are in each class.
So here's the other part of this, too.
Sure.
We've got home-based daycare and we've got daycare centers. So my children were in a home-based daycare up the street from me.
Right.
Now, this was back in the late 80s, early 90s. Mm-hmm. And I found my daycare provider through Fairfax County's Office for Children.
Sure.
Now, people who live in Northern Virginia might think, well, we've already been doing this oversight for many years, and that is true. It's a permit, not a license, it's a permit through Fairfax County. Alexandria also has a process, and so does Arlington. But that is 3 counties out of 95 counties in Virginia that don't have a county-based program.
I work with this struggle every day. And so let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that.
I live in Northern Virginia. I, too, feel fortunate that, Alexandria, Fairfax, Falls Church, Arlington, all have very good child care rules. But there's really 2 Virginias. And once you get out of Northern Virginia, there's the rest of Virginia. And the rest of the Virginia comes under state law. And state law needs to be strengthened. So in Virginia, if you live in Northern Virginia and you're a child care home provider, you need to get that permit as soon as you take in one unrelated child. The counties in Northern Virginia or the cities recognize it's a business. Someone's being paid daily, weekly to care for somebody else's children, and we're going to make sure that they have a background check, they have some minimum training, someone goes in there, just, takes a look.
They support
too. To both protect children to make sure nothing bad happens, and also to make sure that it's a quality setting.
Right.
But in the rest of Virginia, up until 2016, you could have, you didn't need a license until you had 6 children in your home.
Right.
Now
6.
in 2015, I worked with child care where Virginia changed the law. And we started with, as soon as you bring in 1 child, you should have a license. You're in the business of caring for other people's children. There should be some basic protections. We didn't get that. We thought we were going to get 3, but conference committee happened and lots of things happened in conference, and they went from 6 down to 5. And, I heard you at the beginning say, devastated and disappointed. Really, legislative changes happen incrementally.
Incrementally? No, let's talk, now we're going to talk about JLARC. Now we're going to talk about
You have to
JLARC.
celebrate your successes.
Incrementally, no. We're going to talk about the JLARC study.
Okay.
It was commissioned in 1988.
Okay.
By the General Assembly of Virginia.
It was.
Some of those people, by the way, are still there.
Yes.
Who were there in 1988. And the study came back, and in 1989 they presented the findings of the study, which said people wanted more regulation. They wanted oversight. They welcomed that from the state. That was 27 years ago.
Right, but that was a report from JLARC. So what I think you started to say was some of the legislators are still there, and I believe that to be true. And so, they're there 28, 30 years. Generations have gone by.
Right.
That report, I remember that report too, and frankly, at the time, I believed everything it said. It mentioned, the number of working women. It mentioned things that need to be strengthened in Virginia. A few things have happened. Most have not, but a few things have. But here we are, almost, 28 years
almost
at
28
least.
years.
28 years later. And it's the same debate.
It is
Women
the same
are
debate.
working today. Women with babies are working today. Women with children under 6 are working today. They need childcare. They want their children to be safe. They want their children to be in a quality setting. So they're in a place while the parents aren't spending time with them because they're at work, because they have to work, because they have to make ends meet in order to support their families. Want their children to be learning so they start school ready to succeed. So, some of the same people who are saying, we don't want anybody on welfare, take care of your kid, are the same people who think we don't need to help them with childcare. Well, if you don't help them with childcare, they're going to wind up on welfare. So either you're going to support them with welfare or you're going to support them with childcare so that they work. I think that working is better.
I think we all
help.
think that.
Let's help families help themselves, right?
Right.
So the debate is the same. It really hasn't changed. We were able to reduce the family licensing threshold from 6 to 5. I do think it was a miracle. We were able to get it.
Okay, I'm going to try to be happy about that.
I wish I could say otherwise, but spending that time in Richmond, talking to the legislators, seeing that there are 2 Virginias, seeing that some of them have been there quite some time, seeing that many of them are not working women, it's
many
an
of them are not
educational process.
Saying that like 80% of them are not working women, and some of them are working dads, but a lot of them are not dads with children and childcare either.
You either have to wait for them to get grandchildren, or you have to sit with them and educate. I really don't think it's intentionally to have this disconnect. I think they don't get it. And they need to understand what the needs are of working families today. And that means that working families have to speak up. This is what we need. We have a hard time finding childcare. We have a hard time affording childcare. We struggle with the quality of care. We're really worried about it. Here's what we want to see. I just did a focus group with parents in North Carolina last week. And there were some who were white, some who were black, some who were on subsidy, some who were private paying parents. There were 2 people who English was not their first language. They all had in common, they wanted their children to be safe. They wanted to be able to afford a place that was a quality setting for their child. They wanted the kid to be learning. They got it. Some of the parents repeated the brain research back to me. I was so happy to hear that because it meant we are reaching parents.
They get it.
They do
They
understand.
Yep.
And I do think some of that is, Twitter, Facebook, spreading the word through, the media that today's parents use. Today's parents, they have their first baby at 25 on average.
Yeah, older.
And so
Yep.
it's a different way than the legislators who have been there, 20, 25, 30 years. It's a different world. Maybe some of the legislators, their spouses didn't work. That's great for them. Everybody has what works for their own family. But today's parents are working. And today's parents are following the research. And frankly, the research over the decades has changed. We know things now. We know things today and during the last couple of years that we didn't know 20 years ago. So we need to build on that and use it.
You're right. Neuroscience has taken off. People know that neuroscience is a thing. And you're right, brain research, and we've got tools that we didn't have before to do brain studies and to also do longitudinal studies. Mm-hmm. We've got better funded research that is following kids for a longer period of time from birth into their adolescence and young adulthood that we didn't have.
And that we're seeing these early investments work. There's a return. Fewer children are staying back. Fewer children are being referred to special education. More are graduating high school. They're graduating either college or career ready, but they're going on to, higher ed. These things make a difference. They make a difference to local communities with people having higher wage jobs. They make a difference with, stopping a cycle of intergenerational poverty. They make a difference to employers. Do we have a skilled workforce, and who can I hire? And am I going to have jobs where I just can't fill them because the local community doesn't have the talent? So we can follow the research, which makes sense. But so far, it's a struggle because we're needing to educate policymakers about the research and the connect to working families and why investments matter. And little by little, we're making a difference, but it's not happening, overnight.
No, I agree with you, and I think the advocacy, too, has got to come from the grassroots. I think that's the other thing that we are seeing now is that people are suddenly awakened and they're like, holy cow, how do I make a difference, and how do I change the things I don't like or the things I can see are clearly wrong? And I think getting people awakened to the legislative process and the difference that advocacy makes is helping efforts like yours, and we just need more people speaking up and showing up. So please join us after this break. We're going to discuss this issue further.
Okay.
Okay, so what would you bring to my company?
What do you need?
I need problem-solving skills.
I got through high school without a car, a phone, or a computer.
No college degree, though.
Not yet, but life's taught me a lot, and I'm ready for more.
Well, you're not the typical kind of candidate that I hire. But you are exactly what I'm looking for.
Your company could be missing out on the candidates it needs most. Learn how to find a great pool of untapped talent at gradsoflife.org.
They'll test you. Try to break your will. But however loud the loudness gets, however many cheese puffs may fly, you're the driver, the one in control. Stand firm. Just wait. And move only when you hear the click that says they're buckled in for the drive. Never give up till they buckle up.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your hosts.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm Catherine Reed, your host, and we're talking with Grace Reef tonight about childcare here in Virginia. We talked before the break about the importance of having quality childcare as far as the brain development of young children and making sure that they are school ready and that they have a better chance of being career and college ready, and that all of it starts from 0 to 3, and we need to care about that. But now let's talk about the safety issue and why some people see these as separate issues, when in fact, kids need to be safe. We need to have quality child care, but part of that is safety. And we are struggling with that, in my opinion. We are struggling with that in Virginia based on the number of incidents in Virginia of child care deaths.
It is a problem in Virginia. I want to have that quality discussion because I think it's the most important. But we can't get to quality unless we have safety. And safety really is the floor to quality, right? You can have,
that's a good way of looking at it.
Floor to quality. So in Virginia, we really have had about 60, actually a little more than 60
in the last
deaths
10 years. In the last 10 years.
In childcare.
I think that makes us #1 in a very bad way in the United States.
Well, I don't want to scare parents. I think that most of childcare is very safe. But as a parent, you've got to keep your eyes open, and you've got to ask the right questions. And the state needs to protect you. So some of these problems where children have died, frankly, were in unlicensed care. So in Virginia, we have a problem with unlicensed care. Part of that problem is because we don't license homes until 5 children are in the home. And if your own kids happen to be in the home, they're kind of exempt, like they're invisible. So if a provider had maybe 2 or 3 kids, you could have 8 or 9 kids. Now, if something happens, like a fire or an emergency.
Like in Chesterfield.
Like in Chesterfield. So let's talk about Chesterfield, because that was the Allen family. I worked with them with Child Care Aware Virginia. So Joseph Allen was a year old. His mom and dad had been bringing him to a child care woman in the neighborhood. She'd been in business 20, 25 years. She was friendly, nice. Her home was clean. I think they asked good questions. She told the parents, look, we don't need a license because I only take care of 5 kids. So they believed her. She came highly recommended. You don't go through life like doubting everybody.
Right.
You work, so you can't just pop in to see if she's telling the truth. They never saw any more than 5 kids, so they didn't know. But what happened in Chesterfield was that one day, this woman, I guess the night before, had one of those fire pits out in the yard. So she'd emptied it into her garage. I guess it wasn't all the way out and it caught fire. Well, she wasn't licensed, so she didn't have a fire extinguisher. She didn't have working smoke alarms.
Not one single working smoke detector,
She did not
one.
have an emergency evacuation plan. The fire started, there was panic. She ran outside with the kids that she could grab. It's pandemonium, crisis, I can imagine, it was crazy. And the first responder said, did you get all the kids? Did you get all the kids? The neighbors came, did you get all the kids? Because they knew she was caring for kids. And she said, I did. Well, in fact, she did not. So on the second sweep of the house, the first responders, the firefighters, found an infant, 1-year-old, who was upside down in a car seat that wasn't even his own.
It was an infant seat.
It was an infant seat. It wasn't
even
his. Upside down. They, of course, rushed him out of the house, rushed him to the hospital, but he died as a result of the fire, smoke inhalation. So many things could have been prevented. First of all, she didn't have a list of the kids in her care. That baby had been there for 10 months, every single day, every week. How'd she forget him? I think because it was crazy. There was a fire.
And there was no list.
You panicked.
Like on any given day,
right?
Where's the list of who's there?
But she had 8 kids that day, which would have required a license. That would have required a list of the kids. That would have required a fire extinguisher. It would have required working smoke detectors. It would have required some training on evacuation, what to do in emergency. That's the purpose of the training.
Right.
Like you practice so that you don't panic when bad,
and
accidents
that the kids
happen.
know what to do too.
Right. And so he died, and we worked very, very closely with the Allen family in Child Care Aware Virginia to change the law. And we were able to do that in two ways. We were able to reduce that licensing threshold, but we also got a penalty in the law.
Because it was a misdemeanor.
It was a misdemeanor, which is a slap on the wrist.
Like a child died.
Maybe a $200 fine.
And the misdemeanor was for not being licensed.
Right. And so we were able to get a felony penalty, which carries with it, maybe up to 10 years in jail and $100,000 fine. And frankly, we hoped it would never be used. It was hard to get through Congress. I think we went through 17 different committees before the House and the Senate. That Allen family, they were there at every single committee meeting, the grandparents or the parents. They worked very hard, and we were able to get those changes through. Believe me, it was not easy. But we got it, and we all hoped that it would never be invoked. We all hoped that the Commonwealth attorneys would never have to use it. But actually, right now, there's 2 pending cases. And so one's in the Richmond area and one's in Virginia Beach. But they all came down to, if you should have a license and you don't, and you circumvent the law and you have more kids than you should, and a kid dies, you're going to be subject to a felony penalty, and you're going to jail, and you're going to have a hefty fine.
But here's the thing. There is no replacement for a child
Absolutely
that's died.
Not. Right.
And the thing about this, and we were talking a little bit before the show, is that a lot of parents are so strapped by the cost, by the location, and by availability.
Right.
Like, I have to find somebody close that we can afford who has an opening.
Right.
And so I think a lot of parents, they really don't know all the questions to ask. Like, do you have smoke detectors and evacuation plan?
What parent would think that?
They would
never
wouldn't
think that. But that's what makes licensing important.
Right.
Because it's these, they're really common sense things. You can't legislate common sense, but you can hope for it, and you can expose people with a checklist. Here, you're a provider. You're going to be licensed. Here's a checklist. And they follow the checklist. So people think, oh, regulation's bad. But you know what? I don't even like the word regulation, because that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about protections for children. And for example, these things that didn't happen in the home where Joseph Allen died, that would be on a checklist.
Yeah.
And providers could have it.
Providers could have it, and parents would know to ask the right questions.
I think it needs
to be a partnership.
It's too right, but I think it's too hard for parents. There are just so many questions. For any parent who's listening, I encourage you to go to Child Care Aware of Virginia's website, and they have, the top 5 or 10 questions parents should ask. This is what they do every day, work with parents. And I think parents go in and it's emotional, and they're not quite sure what to ask. And, they should begin with, do you have a license? Right. And if somebody says no, they should say, how many kids do you care for? And if they say, a handful, they should go and watch a couple times and step in. They could ask if they're voluntary registered. That's a system in Virginia where if you don't take in the number of kids that require a license, but you take in fewer kids, there's a voluntary registry where you do have those safety checklists. And Child Care Aware of Virginia does work with you to make sure that you're promoting safe care. But the problem is, so much of the care is kind of under the radar. And providers take their chances because, you know what, it's a cash business.
And
particularly
that's by
off
necessity.
families,
It's by necessity. Families have to have the care. People know that.
They do.
They know that.
And somebody says, hey, yeah, I can take one more. And they, kind of think, oh, nothing bad's going to happen. So you often don't know about the illegal child cares until a tragedy does happen. But no parent should have to find out that way.
Right.
So really help yourself if you're looking for child care. What are those top 5 or 10 questions you should ask? What should you look for? And if any providers are listening, what's the checklist? Get it out. Make sure you're following it, because it helps you help yourself. Most providers, I think really the issue is you don't know what you don't know.
That's
true.
That's
somebody
true.
helps you with some key things that are going to promote safety. You're like, oh yeah, thanks. And that's been my experience with providers. They don't want anything bad to happen.
No,
they don't want to harm children. No. They love children.
Of course they do.
But they don't know what they don't know. And so some of this is education on help people being the best that they can be. Which is what they want.
It is what they want. And that needs to be the culture. It needs to be a partnership between the state, the federal government, providers and parents, because everybody has a stake in this, and the stakes are very high. And the fact that we haven't created better public policy, the fact that we haven't funded it, like child care providers are low-income wage earners. We expect all these wonderful things from them when they got bills to pay, and in daycare centers they are more poorly paid than a lot of other professional service providers, and they're caring for our children. But there is, but the funding.
Catherine, the pay is a problem.
The pay is a problem.
The pay is low because parents can't pay more, and parents are really footing the bill.
There's a gap. There's a gap between what parents can pay, what providers need to earn. There is a gap.
And so we pay childcare workers low. They make barely above minimum wage, and we want people that are good, right? But we can't attract and retain quality childcare workers when we're not going to pay them much more than minimum wage. I mean, they're going to go to McDonald's, they're going to go to Walmart, wherever they can go. That's going to almost double their pay.
They can make more as an Uber driver.
They can.
Come on, they can.
Well, yeah, but they would have to have a car. But let's look at the childcare workforce. So they make low wages. On average, it's maybe $9.50 an hour. They qualify for public benefits like food stamps. So they're in a stressful situation. The turnover is high because they're going to leave for a dime more. Why wouldn't they? They need to feed their own families. So you pay them poorly. You have a high turnover. Because you pay low, based on this is all parents can pay, you have a hard time attracting and retaining better educated people. And so you kind of get what you get, and there is this gap. Right now, the National Academy of Sciences is looking at this whole financing issue. And I think they're thinking, look, what we're doing now, it's not enough. This is not a low-income family issue. This is an every family issue.
It is an every
Unless you're in that really top,
and you
very wealthy millionaire, billionaire bracket,
right.
You struggle with the cost of care. Right?
Right.
You have 1 or 2 kids, it doesn't matter. I mean, poor families maybe have it worse, but this is a middle income issue.
Yes.
Childcare is hard to afford. So there's this gap. So the National Academy of Sciences is looking at it. They're holding a public hearing May 17th. I invite anybody who's listening, if you care about this issue, go watch or go testify.
Is this going to be on the Hill?
It's going to be on, well, I don't know what the setting's going to be yet.
Right.
But I know that it's going to happen. I know the National Academy of Sciences, this is part 2. Okay. They came out with a study in 2015 saying this is what the workforce should look like, and this is the pathway to get better educated people. And now they're saying we realize to get more a stronger educated workforce, that we've got to pay them better, and we've got to help them go back to school. We've got to provide, scholarships or tuition, assistance of some type or some kind of help, because on these low-wage jobs they can't afford it. So how do we put them on the pathway? How do we get them better educated? How do we attract better educated workforces, a better educated workforce? We got to pay them more. Parents can't pay more, so we need funding. So they came out with the workforce study in 2015, and now they're looking at the funding piece.
Well, when we come back after this break, it'll be our final segment, and we are going to talk with Grace about what we do going forward and what this research means and what these policy debates can mean when you are involved.
You know what, guys? There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
Hey, Hard, what's this? That's my resignation. You're resigning. Why? You've been putting me under a lot of pressure lately. That's why I'm ready to quit. Oh, I forgot. I'll do better. Please don't quit on me.
Don't let your heart quit on you. Get your uncontrolled high blood pressure to a healthy range before it's too late.
So you can't save money? That's easy as pie. Brown bagging lunch instead of going out. $6 save times 5 days a week times 10 years is $21,000. That's a lot of lettuce. Small changes today, big bucks tomorrow. Feedthepig.org.
Did you know kids who play outdoors have healthier lungs?
Totally.
I did. Did you know that boys that play with dolls make better husbands?
My son has lots of dolls. But did you know terry cloth diapers breathe better?
I did.
It's totally true.
Oh, yeah.
Did you know that strollers have the right of way on the sidewalk?
Yes.
Yep, I did. Did you guys
Did you know that kids who eat breakfast have higher GPAs?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. That's actually what I was going to say.
Did you know babies should never touch silver? It's really bad for them.
I knew that.
Did you guys know that statistically friendly kids have more friends?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's obvious.
Did you know most people think they're using the right car seat for their kid, but they're not?
Parents who really know it all know for sure that their child is in the right seat at the right age and size. Visit safercar.gov/the right seat to make sure your child is protected.
I'm putting that on my blog.
I just put it in mine.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to the final segment of Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Joining me is Grace Reef tonight, and we are talking about childcare here in Virginia. Thank you so much for being here, Grace. It's been very educational, speaking of education. So let's talk a little bit about, there's a Child Care Action Center where people can get information on the Child Care Aware site. What can they expect to find there?
Sure. So Child Care Aware Virginia has an education and action center, and it's really an information clearinghouse. So there's information, on facts and data, over 400,000 kids under 6 with working parents, things like that. Then there's information about background checks. Why are background checks important? There's a one-pager on, kind of what's going on throughout the country and what's Virginia doing and why. There's information about pending bills. There's information about the Child Care State Plan. This is the vision that the state has, and this is what they have in place, and this is the path that they want to go on. And there's a summary of the federal laws involved, summary of state laws involved. There's also a bunch of parent stories, in finding care or affording care or some tragedies that have happened that point to how can we prevent this in the future. And as part of the Action Center, there's an area where you can click on a link and take action. You can let state legislators know how you feel. So,
and that's important. Let's just pause there because, often legislators, people are like, well, why would my one email? Or calling my legislator like they don't care. Yes, they do care because they log every single email, every single phone call, every single person who shows up to their office, and particularly if that person's a constituent. Yes, they do care. Every single contact that anybody makes with their delegate or their senator makes a world of difference.
Absolutely. And that has been my experience. The first thing that happens when you go to Richmond and you walk around the General Assembly and you want to meet with a member, they say, where are you from? What's your zip code? I mean, they prioritize those people that are their constituents in their district. So every single contact matters. When there's legislation pending, I think people feel like, well, I can't make a difference, it's just me. But if everybody felt like that, then we could never
There'd be a great empty, and the legislators fall back on, well, that's not an issue. I've heard him say it. It's not an issue my constituents care about.
Right, which is why they need to hear, and they need to hear from everybody. So on Child Care Aware Virginia's website, and I can send you a link, you can click and send an email to a legislator, or let's say you don't know who your legislators are. I mean, there's lots of them,
There's
right?
a lot of people who don't know who their legislators are.
There's governor, there's members of Congress, there's senator, there's state senate, delegates, local level. I mean, there's a lot of elected officials. Well, on the website we have, find your legislator. So you can put in your zip code and your street address and it will match you and it will give you a long list. These are all your elected officials. And then you can click right on that link and you can go to that delegate or that state senator's website and you can see what committees they're on. You can get their phone number, you can get their email, you can get their room number, but there are ways to communicate. I would look for their Facebook page. I would look for their Twitter account. I would look for their phone number and get them on the phone and say, look, I'm a working mom and I care about safe childcare. I understand there's a vote on April 5th. How are you going to vote? Because I want to make sure you're working to support working families in your district. People need to hear that message. I think sometimes it's that people think, oh, I'm not an expert. I'm not a lawyer. Oh, that's, somebody else's job. The fact is, you are an expert. If you're a parent, that makes you an expert. If you're a parent and you use childcare, then you know more than probably 99% of the state legislators. So take that expertise as a parent and say, I'm a parent. I use childcare, or I'm a parent, I'm struggling to find childcare, or I'm a parent, I'm having trouble affording childcare, or I'm a parent, I have 2 kids and I can't find quality childcare, whatever the issue is.
Or I'm a business owner and my employees have trouble finding reliable daycare.
That's even better.
How about that?
That's even better. So the bottom line is, if Child Care Aware Virginia's website can help you locate your legislator and give you the contact information, reach out. April 5th is a big day. And
it's our one loan. It's like a precious thing that survived.
Right.
It survived this legislative session, and it went to the governor, and it's come back, and it needs some help.
You know, I would say, when I worked in the Senate, in Congress, they were there all year.
Right.
And that's a lot of time to hold hearings and become educated and all that. And then I started working on state issues. And what I find out is, you know, you're in for 45 days or you're in for 60 days, and that's the long session.
That's a long session.
And you got to cover the whole state, every single thing under the sun in those 60 days. And you really only have 30 because it's got to get through the House and Senate, so there's this thing called crossover. And you really have 30 days. 60-day session, you have 30. So what happens is February 25th, that was the last day, they leave town, and then they come back April 5th. And on that day, they deal with, I don't know, it might be 100 bills. I tried to find the list, and I couldn't find it. But what happens is these bills get sent to the governor. If they make it through the legislative process, they get sent to the governor. The governor can sign them into law. He can veto them, at which point they have to come back April 5th for an override vote, or he can modify them and send them back. So there are maybe 80 bills that have been modified that are coming back, maybe 40 vetoes, so those votes. So in that one day, they're going to take at least 120 votes, maybe more. So 2 or 3 minutes on each bill. It's crazy.
It is crazy.
So that's why contacting your legislator, saying child care safety matters, and I want you to support the governor's modified bill, is really important, because the debate could be that short. Yeah. And, you know, hey, people in my district care about this. So let me tell you a little bit about the bill. SB 1239. In Virginia, super complicated. I don't think any other state is this complicated. There are 14 categories of license-exempt care. That is care that the General Assembly said, oh, that kind of care, that doesn't need a license. And so, you know, some of these tragedies that have been happening with families, they're happening in that care. And it's under the radar because it's license exempt. So, you know, we came in 2016 and worked hard and passed a bill to require a study of these 14 categories. What are they? Who do they serve? Where are they? Are there any protections that would be recommended? So there was a study group. And that study group involved like a lot of stakeholders, all kinds of, you know, before and after school programs and school age programs and private childcare programs and private preschool programs and karate programs and Parks and Rec programs, you know, religious programs. Everybody who's got some kind of childcare program was around this table, and we met for a couple months, couple meetings, reviewed the issues, and a report was filed with recommendations. And Senator Hanger, who's a Republican from Harrisburg, took those recommendations and put them in a bill. And that bill, you know, was bare minimum. It didn't require licensing. What it said was, okay, we looked at the 14 areas. Let's see 8 of these things. We're going to create 2 buckets. 1, really not childcare, 8 of those things, and 6 that are. So among the 8, for example, if you take your child to soccer practice once a week, and while he's at soccer practice, you go to Starbucks and get a coffee and come back, it's still not childcare, it's soccer practice.
Right.
So there were 8 types of things that were in the bucket called not childcare. There were 6 types of settings that you would call center-based, like group-based care, not those homes, but, you know, center-based group settings, that are childcare. And of those things, we were going to have some requirements. And really, they're far, far from licensing. You know, basically, 1, if you intend to operate, you're going to file with the commissioner so that they know, you know, that you're in existence and the ages of the kids that you serve, maybe, and that what category you filed under, because now that we know there are 6, so which one are you filing under? Because that's one of the big problems is, who knows? They're exempt and who knows? So now you would file under a certain category. Second, if there are any serious injuries or deaths, you're going to have to report them, you know?
Pretty common sense.
Right. And third, and I think this is probably one of the most important things in the bill, if you're not licensed, you're going to have to post it. So when parents walk in, they're going to see a sign that says, you know, this facility is not required to have a license. This program is not required to have a license. I think that's fair, Because I think parents see a center-based setting and
they make all kinds of
assumptions, and they're logical.
Right, logical.
And you feel badly. They walk in and assume
that somebody's providing oversight.
Right. There's 100 kids there, so you assume
somebody's
background
got a
check.
policy.
You assume training. You assume some minimum health and safety. You assume maybe an inspection every now and then. You assume that as a parent because if you see 100 kids throughout, a building in separate different rooms, you kind of think that, right?
Right.
So anyway, these 6 settings that have to, follow those 3 things, and then there are a couple other minor things like CPR. You got to have somebody on site with CPR. Kind of crazy. Like that's the whole thing about CPR. Like accidents happen, you can't predict. Oh, someone's going to choke tomorrow, right? You want to have somebody on site where if that did happen, they'd be able to be certified and help, right? Because that would fall into something that could be prevented.
Preventable,
right? A child chokes on a grape.
Injury.
That could happen.
Right.
And safe sleep practices.
Right.
And so basically, there have been, of those 60 deaths that I mentioned, 63 or 64, most of them were infants. Right. And most of them are related to safe sleep.
Right. So they were put on their stomachs instead of on their backs.
Right. And the American Academy of Pediatrics has said, put the babies on their back. It's called the Back to Sleep campaign. And that's after decades of research of looking at trends and trying to figure out what are the safest practices. And Congress actually just required states for licensed care to do this.
Right.
So now we're talking about, okay, these 6 categories, they're unlicensed. We're not going to require licensing, but we are going to make sure if they care for infants, they're going to have safe sleep.
Right.
So that's a requirement. And an emergency evacuation plan. We talked about that.
Makes sense.
If fire happens or emergency happens, you got to have an emergency plan. So, it's really a handful of things. You would think it's common sense. You think it's practical. The bill did pass the Senate. Senator Hanger was able to push that along. In the House, Delegate Philicorn, she's from Burke, Springfield area. She worked very hard on the bill, along with Senator Hanger. But it got gummed up and was controversial. And some of those categories that were license exempt had some issues. Parks and Rec felt like we do our own thing, we do it well, we don't want anyone coming in. Others had different issues. So it was a little bit controversial, and some changes were made, and some language was added at the end that said, okay, we're going to go along with this, but actually, if we're going to do inspections and it costs more money, and you don't have it, Department of Social Services, you're going to have to come back to the committees and tell us you don't have it and how much you need, and you have to stop any effort to do inspections until you get that money. So anyway, it went along, went to conference, and in conference, new things that weren't in either the House or Senate bill appeared.
Right.
And so it repealed the section of the code in religious exempt care to promote safety. It changed the background check section. It made these changes. And so the governor restored these safety things. There'll be a vote on April 5th. We're hopeful it's not a partisan issue, that everybody contacts the legislators and said, don't make it partisan, vote for kids.
Thank you so much, Grace. I appreciate it. This has been great having you on, and I want everyone to pay attention. Go to Child Care Aware Virginia to find out how they can contact their legislature.